Greatest parts about Advent is that we get to look at a word that is common to us, and then we get to see it in light of the Advent season, in light of Christ and in light of the scriptures. Last week, I loved how Mike did this with hope. And he took hope in the modern day way that we use it, and then he said, let's reconstruct it from the Bible. Rather than think of it in the worldly way of wishful thinking, let's think of it as joyful expectation or a thing that we know is going to happen, anticipation for expectation that we know is going to come about. Today, we're going to be doing a similar thing with peace. Peace is used in many different ways in our culture today. Do this with me. If I put my hand to my ear, you hear a pause, then say the word peace for these situations. The person on the phone with screaming kids in the back says, all I need is a little and quiet. The person 2 weeks ago that doesn't want to bring up politics at the Thanksgiving dinner table says, I just want to keep the most famous people will say that they just want world. The person who does not have the funds to do something that they need in their life says, I'm just trying to make blank with it. To the person who dies, we say, rest in. Knowing our doors are locked gives us of mind. If I offend you and make you a loaf of bread, or I should say Erica is the one making a loaf of bread, we say that it would be a offering. The reality is, many of us do not feel a whole lot of peace, even though we talk about peace often. We look at the world that is around us and we do not see peace. And then we look at our own lives, and whatever peace is, we question if it exists in our lives at all. Is peace even attainable? The way I typically do sermon prep is I read a biblical passage, and I have this whole thing that I do. It's a 31-step process typically, or more or less depending on that week. But typically, I'll start with the passage and start with prayer, start praying through the passage, thinking through the passage. What's the structure of the argument? Why was this passage written? What is the author trying to get across? What's the main point? And then I'll read it in different translations, and then I'll read it in the original languages. And then if I have a boatload of time, which doesn't happen very often, I might diagram the structure of the text. Usually I have very little time for that, but then I'll jump into the commentaries and jump into some word studies, things like that, jump into the cultural background information. And then usually I'll block out a significant portion of time in which I will sit down and write the sermon, say, what do I want to say to the people from this text? What's the main point of this text, and how should I portray that to the people Sunday morning? This week, I sat down to write a sermon about peace, and it was the most unpeaceful week and the most unpeaceful point in the week that I've had in a long time. How am I supposed to write a sermon about peace when I am in the most unpeaceful point in my life that I've had in a long time? And if we're honest, this non-peace is true for all of us. We look at our workplace, we look at our life with kids, we look at the disaster situation with extended family, we look at our marriage, we look at our living situation, we look at the situation with neighbors, and I consider, what is peace? Notice in all of these examples that peace is somehow relational. God has created us to be relational beings. Peace is not found in objects. When we talk about peace, it is most often discussed in the context of relationships. And this is a tidbit of information that's going to help us inform what we're talking about today. In the Hebrew context, Peace or shalom is typically tied to interpersonal or social peace. It's found in relationships. And then later, the Greeks, when they want to talk about peace, they talk about a different word for peace, and their focus is on inner peace in our own lives, how we feel peace. But the biblical authors, even though they're using Greek, are trying to do something different. They're trying to show how peace comes to us because of our relationship with God and because of our relationship with others. This is how we are meant to understand peace, is in the context of relationships. Think about the New Testament authors. They start with their letters with peace, and they end their letters with peace. There is peace flowing through this letter that they write. Letters like Colossians that we did together, that we have started together. Here's the main point for us today. Because we have a God of peace who has brought peace to us, live in and for peace found in Jesus. First, this morning, we look at the promise of peace to the world. The promise of peace to the world. Why does the world need peace? If I think of a word to describe Adam and Eve before the fall, it might be peace. They had peace with each other. They had peace with God. They had peace with the earth. And then when peace gets ruined by sin, we see peace ruined on multiple different levels. They are spiritually dead, it says, so that they no longer have a relationship with God. Their peace with God has been destroyed. And then the curse also affects their interpersonal relationships as well. Their peace is destroyed with each other. And then not only just relational peace, but then their peace with the earth. This thing that is meant to give them life and sustain them is going to be difficult for them. There's not peace with it. It's going to have thorns and thistles from now on. And then the very next story that we have is Cain and Abel, and not a peaceful relationship. We see this as the continual theme, this absence of peace. We need peace. So God would step in and create a path for peace back into the world. And he announces this throughout the Hebrew Bible. After the Israelites sin terribly in Numbers 25, Phinehas acts courageously for God. God promises a covenant of peace with him and with Israel because of Phinehas' act. But it's God doing the creating of this peace. Humans have messed up this peace, but God is creating a path forward for peace. Remember 2 weeks ago when I talked about expositional preaching and how you'd have to be flipping around all over the place? Another benefit would be I'm sorry, that really is the benefit. We talked about several benefits a few weeks ago, but a big benefit for expositional preaching is that we get to stay in this one text. This theme is continued in the prophets, this theme of peace. We get to the prophets like Ezekiel 34, 10 through 31. In this text, God promises that his people will have one shepherd, someone to fulfill David's line. And while they have had many shepherds who fail them, God promises to give them one good shepherd. And this shepherd will not rule over them. He will be among them. And it is through this good shepherd that a covenant of peace will come. The purpose of this covenant of peace is that it is given to God's people. It is so that they will know God and that he is sovereign over all. It is through this covenant of peace, this promise of fulfillment to Jesus, that we can know God and have a relationship with him. Later, in Ezekiel 37:26, God promises the covenant of peace. This is just a few chapters later. And this covenant of peace will be a forever covenant that will not end. It is a covenant that grows in the world and that is made through God, dwelling with humans in peace. A similar passage would be Isaiah 9:6. This is a passage that we often think of at Christmas time. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. And on the throne of David over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness over from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. While we are promised this coming child to be born, this child would be the Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. This is a familiar Advent verse that many of us know, that people looked forward to for thousands of years, that Jesus would come to give the world peace. And then the following verse, verse 7, describes the rule of the Prince of Peace. We are told that the dominion would be expansive, immeasurable prosperity. He will fulfill the line of David. His peace will be about justice and fairness, and his reign of peace will be forever. A few chapters after this, we see the reign of peace and what it looks like. Isaiah 11, 1 through 5, discusses the Prince of Peace and how he reigns. He comes to bring justice and kindness to the poor and the less fortunate. These are the people he comes to save. These are the people that he cares about. Who does Jesus come to bring peace to? The ones who are forgotten and overlooked, the ones who nobody cares about, the ones who don't deserve kindness and justice. These are the ones that Jesus comes to bring peace to. And then another text for us would be Zechariah 9 through 10. This is a passage that we often think of in the resurrection, but this is announcing how Jesus comes. Rejoice greatly, O daughters of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey and on a colt and a foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot of Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. His rule shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. In this text, we see that his reign is about peace. We see the prophecy of him riding a donkey, and a young donkey. And we ask, why is Jesus riding a donkey? Because he doesn't need a war horse. He is coming to bring peace, announcing peace to the nations, peace to the earth. This is the peace that we see coming in the birth of Christ. When Jesus comes to the earth, this is the peace he is bringing to earth. Peace that removes war, peace that shows justice and fairness, peace that is found in relationships, peace that is brought through a person outside of humanity that comes to be part of humanity. This is what Christmas and the Advent season are about. Next, let's look at the assurance of peace in our hearts. This is where we really begin to see the difference of peace in the world and the way that the New Testament authors use peace. Peace is not found in the world or in worldly things, but in our relationship with God. We will also see the inner self-peace, and how that's an outworking of the main peace that we have in our relationship found in God. But this inner peace is not the main focus of the New Testament. The peace of the New Testament is found in relationship with God, and then that gives us peace in our own lives, individual peace. While many things in our lives may not have peace, we can rest in the fact that our soul is at peace with God. And so let's look at a few places that talk about that. Main verse for us today is coming from Luke 2, which is the Christmas story, and we're looking at verses 13 and 14. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those whom he is pleased." With whom he is pleased. Side note on Luke 2:13, saying heaven's armies appeared. But this army is not coming to bring war. This army is coming to bring peace. This peace comes in contrast with the peace that is brought about by Caesar in chapter 2. Think about Caesar's peace was brought about by war and by violence. Caesar creates suffering to bring about peace. Before Christ, this is how humans knew to bring about peace, through suffering. But now, Jesus comes to bring a new type of peace, a peace that will be brought about not by creating suffering, but by taking on suffering. Jesus, God, very God, comes to earth to suffer in humanity, absorbing the suffering in order to bring about peace. Caesar's peace, forged through suffering inflicted by war and violence, stands in stark contrast to the peace offered by Jesus, born from his absorption of suffering by taking on human form. This is the advent of Jesus. Now, we have to deal with a difficult thing between translations here. The King James will say, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." This is not how many other translations read this text. It is now that we get to talk about textual criticism, which is one of my favorite topics. This, because I'm a nerd. This is a topic where we are not being critical about the text, but rather we are looking at many different manuscripts that we have and manuscript evidence that we have to understand which translation of this is the best. This is something that the seminary that I went to, we got to get our feet wet just a little bit in this. And I can't go into a ton of depth on textual criticism, but if you have questions about it, it would be my joy to share that with you. Most scholars believe that the ESV is the correct translation of the Greek here. Peace among people with whom he is pleased. And you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, why do I care about this translation? Why do I care about textual criticism? How is this practical for us? Let me tell you that there are a few areas that textual criticism actually matters in the New Testament. And this is one of them, where it matters for how we interpret the text. We need to ask ourselves, with whom does God's peace rest? With the birth of Christ, what does it mean that peace has come? I don't like to make a pragmatic argument, and I think that the manuscripts are plenty clear for us to get the correct interpretation here. But realistically, I look at the world around me 2,000 years after Jesus' birth, and I don't see how his birth has changed the world towards peace. War and conflict are still prevalent. So, what does this angelic announcement mean that Jesus is coming to bring peace? In what ways has Jesus actually brought about peace? Who is this peace for? And this is the question before us in verse number 14. The proper translation of this verse says, "Peace with whom he is pleased." God is not giving his peace to all, but coming to give peace to the ones he will have a relationship with. The ones God has chosen for his good pleasure are the ones who are receiving this peace. Stay with me for a moment. Divine peace, God's peace, is not given wherever human goodwill is found. God's grace of his good gift of peace is not based on human effort or human will, but on the divine plan of God. He doesn't give his peace to the ones who earn it through their goodwill, because none of us are good enough to earn his goodwill or his peace. Think about Romans 3:23, tells us that all fall short of God's glory. So this peace is not brought about through human effort, but it is through his good pleasure. The emphasis is on God, not on humans. This peace, could not be secured by human goodwill, but only by God, who comes to fix the human broken will. This announcement of peace in Luke 2 is for the people of God and for us who believe. This is what Christmas time is about. We remember the advent of peace and his coming to earth. And this advent is bringing us peace. And how has it brought us peace? Now we get to spend time looking into this. The peace that we are brought is through the reconciliation that we have to God through Christ. This is the point of Colossians that we've been seeing many weeks ago back when we were in Colossians. Colossians 1:20 says that we have peace because of the reconciliation we have with God. Ephesians 2 tells us that Jesus came to preach and to bring peace to us who were afar off. We were far from God because of our sin, and we have been brought near to God because of the blood of Christ. What does peace look like? Peace looks like us being brought near to God, or even having the ability to be brought near to God. You know, I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of easy Christmas texts, right? Texts this morning. One for us to look at would be in Leviticus. How does Leviticus sound for a Christmas text? After the children of Israel come out of Egypt, God gives them the law. And with these laws, we realize that there are many problems with the Israelites. And our sin is keeping us from God. Peace offerings are needed in Leviticus. In Leviticus 3, 1 through 5, we see this peace offering. This peace offering was so that the worshipers could have fellowship with God. This offering brought peace so that God and his worshipers could have restored peace between them, so that they could have a relationship, so that they could have fellowship together. Think about Hebrews 13:20. Now, may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, a great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant. This God of peace is bringing peace by the bloody sacrifice of his own Son. This is the covenant of peace that is made with us. So, when we talk about Jesus being our peace, and Jesus coming to give us peace, he comes to give us peace as a sacrifice so that we can be brought near to God, who were afar off. Jesus does not just bring peace, he is our peace. Jesus is our peace offering so that we can have access to God. Possibly one of the greatest verses on peace is Romans 5. If you have tuned out for this entire sermon, pay attention right here. If you're going to take away one verse today to think about Romans 5:1, talking about peace. This, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through Jesus Christ. You'll have to forgive me. I'm a little bit sick today. What does it look like for us to have peace? We have peace with God because we have been declared righteous by faith in Jesus. This is so critical for us to understand about peace. We have peace with God because of Jesus. And what does this mean for us today? No matter what is happening in our life, the most important relationship and the most important part of who we are is peace with God. We may have situations in our life that try to destroy our peace. We may have a spouse who wants to create conflict. We may have young children who want to wreck our lives. We may have old children who want to wreck our lives. We may have a boss or a coworker who is difficult for us to deal with. We may have deadlines or deadlines at school that throw us into a spin, not something peaceful. And don't even get us started on the in-laws. Can peace among in-laws even exist? But through all of this tangential stuff, my peace with God is secure in Jesus. Sometimes I really need this. And I should say all the time, I really need this. But this week especially was a week of conflict for me. I have wrestled with things, and sometimes I get so bogged down in this stuff in my life that is trying to destroy my peace. But it's good for me to take a moment and to remember the peace that I have with God. Even though I've got all of this stuff going on in my life, all of this tangential stuff in my life, I have peace with God. And now I can, as Hebrews says, approach the throne of grace with confidence, boldly to receive mercy and find grace when I need help. One of the ways that I need help is peace. But now I can, because the peace that I have, the peace that is found in Jesus, allows me to run to my Father's throne and find peace in my relationship with him. I have found peace this week by taking a moment to reflect on that and to pray and to think through that with God. And I would encourage all of us to be doing that this week. What about us as a body? When we have turmoil in our lives, what do we run to find peace? Next, let's look at the hope of peace in eternity. The hope of peace in eternity. What does the hope of peace in eternity look like? Our peace is secure. This hope of peace is an expectation that is sealed in heaven. We rest in the fact that our peace is secure because of Jesus. One text for us to reflect on is Revelation 22:2. Better than 666, right? Through the middle of the street of the city also, and on the other side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. Critical interpretation note here. When we get to apocalyptic literature, don't get hung up on the details. Rather, we are seeing this major theme happening here of this new heaven and this new earth flowing from the Lamb and from God is this river that is nourishing the tree of life. And this tree of life comes to bring healing to the nations, to bring peace to the nations. This is a garden scene that is meant to make us think of humanity's past and the peace that Adam and Eve had with each other and with God. And we lost that peace with God. And we lost the fellowship that we had with our Creator. But this fellowship and this fellowship that comes through healing is only found in Jesus, the peace that is given to us. Remember when I talked about this already and not yet kingdom, this already and not yet kingdom that I mentioned a few weeks ago? Do I have life with God? Yes. Do I have full life with God? Not yet. Am I part of Christ's kingdom? Yes. Already. Am I fully part of Christ's kingdom? Not yet. There's still more yet to come. And same with peace. Though I experience it now, already in this kingdom, I will experience it in a greater way someday, in a different way with God. This is what Revelation 22 is pointing us towards. There is more yet to come. And more yet to taste of his peace. But Jesus, the one who restores broken things, the one who brings peace not just for the moment, but for all of eternity. This scene of bliss and healing for the nations is for all time. This is the scene that we have to look forward to. We go through lots of different stuff in our life, lots of things that do not give us peace, and we look forward to the day when we can rest in the eternal kingdom of Jesus and to the ultimate peace that comes in the healing of the nations through the cross. So, even though we get bogged down with situations in our life that are not peaceful, we can rest in the fact that someday God is bringing us ultimate peace. Okay, the easy part of the sermon is over. Now we get to the hard part, the part of the sermon that hits home for us. Exercise of peace in our lives. If you're waiting for the so what slide to pop up, this is the so what slide, the exercise of peace in our lives. Peace is not simply an end of war or not having conflict. It is an enacting of justice and fairness. It is ensuring unity in community. James 3:18 says that the wise person's fruits are shown living in peace and making peace with others. Again, we see the theme of peace being tied to the relationship and community more than an inner peace. Think about Romans 16:19 through 20. For your obedience is known to all, so that I rejoice over you. But I want you to be wise and do what is good, and innocent to do what is evil. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Now, this is an odd verse. This is a confusing verse. Look at what the God of peace is doing. The God of peace is crushing Satan under whose feet? Our feet. Now, this should be perplexing to us because we know and have talked about before the proto-evangelium that we get to in Genesis 3:15. Mike even mentioned it last week. This promise of this offspring coming from the line of the woman that would come to crush the serpent and his power. But now, in this passage, who is doing the crushing? While Christ is initially the one who crushes Satan forever, Christ has had the fulfillment of crushing Satan under his feet. As the Prince of Peace, already obtaining victory for us, he now uses his church to continue putting down evil and lifting up what is good. It is now this method that peace is brought through. And who are the ones that are given this peace and this role of peace? It is us. The ones who have been given peace now get to be the arbiters of peace. God is using us to bring peace to the earth. Lest you think that I am completely full of it here, I would encourage you to go to your devotionals this week. Think about the devotionals that you have in Friday, in the Friday one and the Saturday one as well. This is chock full of just a few, and there are many more that could be listed, focusing on how New Testament authors saw us as the arbiters of peace in the world. Now that we have been given peace, we portray peace to those in our lives. One for us to reflect on, kind of as we close, would be Romans 14:16. So then, let us pursue what makes for peace and for the building up of one another. This passage is talking about how while we as believers have many freedoms, we should be willing to give up the freedoms to live in peace with others. And this is a hard verse for some of us to deal with and for all of us to deal with, because I have these freedoms, I like to do these things, I enjoy to do these things. But by giving up some of the things that we love and enjoy for the sake of peace with others, we are building up in them Christ, and so that they don't have a stumbling block. We are able to hold them up and move them closer in their walk with Christ. By our pursuit of peace, we are bringing other people up in their walk with Christ. What a serious task for us to consider. By our path towards peace, we affect the lives of others on their spiritual journey. While we get confused in Christianity that we think we might need to be peacekeepers, we are peacemakers. This is Jesus' words. Peace is an action that we are called to work towards, not passively sit around hoping that it happens. How will you know if you are a child of God? By keeping peace. Not by keeping peace, no. How will you know that you're a child of God? By making peace. And what does making peace look like? It looks like having hard conversations sometimes to go towards resolution. It looks like me giving up the things that I think are important in my life in order to keep peace with those around me. Can you think of a good peacekeeper in the Bible? Maybe. Think about Abigail. Abigail and the story of David and Nabal, right? David is running from Saul. He's doing his own thing. He's with his mighty men, and he's been protecting Nabal's servants and stuff for a little while. And while he is there protecting Nabal's servants, he says, "Hey, Nabal, why don't you, can you try to send over somebody to bring us some food? You know, you got any leftovers? Got any scraps or anything? We would love to have a little bit of table scraps." And so David sends this message, but it's interesting because David mentions peace twice to him in this greeting. He says, "Hey, peace to you, peace to you. Do you have any food for us? Peace, you know, do you have any food for us?" And then it's like David's trying to figure out what this peace thing is. And then Nabal's like, "David, I don't even know that guy. What has he done for me? I'm not giving him any food." And so he sends a messenger back to David, and David gets word of this, and David's super angry. And he's like, "Okay, guys, grab a sword. We're going to go knock this bug off the face of the planet. We are done with him." So he gets 400 men to grab a sword. They get up. They leave 200 guys behind to protect what's left. They take 400 guys, and David's on the warpath to Nabal, going to wipe him and his people off the face of the planet. And then Abigail, what does she do? Abigail was not a peacekeeper. Abigail was a peacemaker. She does not sit by passively, hoping that peace might come about. And to be honest, the peace that David was coming to bring through war would have been good for her. You see, Nabal is described as an evil and a wicked man. We don't really know exactly what that means, but no doubt he was not a good husband. Abigail would have been benefited to maybe not have Nabal in her life any longer. But instead of doing that, she knows that her husband is wicked. She even admits it. But she makes this feast for David. She runs to David and says, "Hey, here's a feast for you. Here's some food for you. Please don't kill Nabal." And she says, and then David's words are funny to her. He says, "Oh, this is peace," right? He's like, "Oh, peace is with you. Peace is not with me. I was not coming to bring peace. Peace is with you." And David gets it. So for us, rather than sitting back and trying to keep peace and wishing for a favorable outcome, we should be seeing us and ourselves as peacemakers. We have been given peace. We should live out peace in our lives, in the lives of others. Radical unity and peace lived out in our community because we have been given peace with our relationship with God, and that is secured. Now we can make peace and secure peace with those around us. Let's pray.